decision right here and now.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
My name is Linda, and it's always a privilege to welcome all of you here and at home. And the intention is to share something inspiring or reassuring or motivating, particularly spiritually oriented. And so in reviewing my latest awakenings and awarenesses, I'll begin with this. I have had so many miracles experienced this last year, and particularly this summer and fall, from the earth. I've discovered oyster mushrooms and puffballs. Also something called shrimp of the woods, and they are delicious. I have discovered an oak savanna in Monona, Wisconsin, which is the Aldo Leopold Center. I have discovered indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teachings of plants. The abundance of reciprocity and what reciprocity even is, and the destructiveness of the Wendigo spirit that is self-serving, opposite of reciprocity. All of this comes from Robin Wall Kimmerer and her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. Sometimes we fall in love, and I have fallen in love with Robin Wall Kimmerer. She is of the Potawatomi Nation and a botanist and understands the plant kingdom and understands that humanity is the youngest being on the planet and that wisdom comes from the plants and the earth. I have been reminded of the healing, transforming power of the practices of peacemaking, loving kindness, and forgiveness. And for that, I will share with you about 5 different poems or teachings that Jack Kornfield has collected in The Art of Forgiveness, Loving Kindness, and Peace. This comes from Chief Seattle. Extend your loving kindness so that it embraces the whole of humanity and the whole of the world. What is man without the beasts? If all the beasts were gone, men would die from the great loneliness of spirit, for whatever happens to the beasts also happens to man. And understand, of course, that they observe the slaughter of the bison, of the buffalo. And I was walking with a friend of mine, a new friend, and on the sidewalk was this lovely little cricket, and she stomped it to death. I'm like, what are you doing, and why did you do that? Actually, I didn't say that, but I was thinking that. I haven't decided if we're going to keep being friends yet or not. Make certain to include yourself. One of the greatest blocks to loving kindness is our own sense of unworthiness. If we leave ourselves out of the circle of love and compassion, we have misunderstood. I believe that was the Buddha. Shoji Yam Trungpa says, loving kindness gives birth to a natural compassion. The compassionate heart holds the pain and sorrow of our life and of all beings with mercy and tenderness. It is this tender heart that has the power to transform the world. And Buddha again. The human mind can create conflict. Don't we know that? It can also create peace. To find peace in the world, we must find peace in ourselves. There is no higher happiness than peace. Whatever the situation, we cannot make peace unless we ourselves are peaceful. Thich Nhat Hanh. And lastly, peace is born out of equanimity and balance. Balance is flexibility, an ability to adjust graciously to change. Equanimity arises when we accept the way things are. If you expect your life to be up and down, your mind will be much more peaceful. And that comes from the Lama Yeshe. So thank you for the opportunity to have shared that in the welcome. I hope you will find some comfort and some inspiration in those words. If you would share with me in speaking our vision, a world powerfully transformed through shared spiritual awakening, and advancing the movement of spiritual awakening through transformation, through unity, a positive path for spiritual living, and our values. Abundance, acceptance, community, diversity, integrity, joy, and love. And we celebrate our children by saying together, Unity of Appleton sees the divinity in all children and nurtures their unfolding spirituality. And our daily word is joy. I delight in simple joys. Joy, it has been said, comes much more from wanting what we have than from having what we want. Reflecting on this thought, I embrace the simple joys that this day offers. I enjoy my morning coffee or tea, savoring its flavor and fragrance. Walking through my neighborhood, I greet friends, smile at people I haven't yet met, and enjoy the fresh air. I find satisfaction in taking care of my home, working at my job, or helping a friend. Even if I am not with them today, I feel joy as I think of my connection with the people I care most about. I know joy whenever I look for possibilities rather than focusing on my problems. My greatest joy is my awareness that wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, God is always with me. You show me the path of life. In your presence, there is fullness of joy. In your right hand are pleasures forevermore. From Psalms chapter 16, verse 11. And if you'd like to say with me together, I delight in simple joys.
Our love is
love the photo of the bicycle. Lately, I've been testing electric bikes, and they make me happy. I was also thinking when one door closes, another one opens. So, yeah, electric bikes. Reverend Evin Wilkins is our beloved speaker today. I believe he is out in Washington somewhere. He is a graduate of the Unity Urban Ministerial School and an ordained Unity minister. He is the co-minister for Courageous Living in Unity, a new alternative Unity ministry. Evin enjoys spending time with his wife Mindy and his fur babies, reading, writing, yoga, shamanistic studies, and learning to play the guitar. Thank you for being with us here today.
Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Yes, I'm in Washington State, so hello from the West Coast. Hello, Unity of Appleton, you're quickly becoming one of my favorite churches, so I am honored and appreciative that you all have let me back. And Linda, I thank you for those poems, because we haven't talked at all about, what today's message is going to be, but I really think that you're all going to find a lot of synchronicity between those poems and today's talk. So it's always kind of funny how that works out. So I'm always grateful for that. So speaking of Washington State, my wife Mindy and we went to a pumpkin patch yesterday. And it's still been kind of warm here in Washington. I mean, it's still been in the 80s, and I think finally later on this week it's going to be in the 60s, which we're happy about. But we went to a pumpkin patch yesterday in what was still very much kind of summer-like weather. So, but anyway, it happened to also be a very windy day. It's like the fall's trying to come in, but hasn't quite made it yet. But due to the wind, when we were out at the pumpkin patch, all of this dust was just blowing up around us. And it felt like, for lack of a better term, it felt a bit chaotic. Stuff's kind of blowing around. They're trying to keep all these tents and stuff from blowing all over the place. So it felt a little chaotic. And I think for lots of us, we're going through a time in our world that some of us would probably describe a little bit as chaotic right now, feeling a little bit of chaos in some of the things that are happening around us. Now, if you tuned into my talk a few weeks ago here at the Unity of Appleton, I talked about one of Pema Chadron's books called the Welcoming the Unwelcome. Now, I thought that due to some of the chaotic feeling, that we're kind of feeling right now, maybe some of the chaotic nature of some of the times that we're living in right now, that it might be good to bring this book into discussion again today. And plus, it's one of my favorites. So, I thought it might be good to bring it in. But I'm going to be delving a little bit into chapters 3 and 4 for anybody who's interested in reading the book, or maybe just kind of diving into a little bit of a deeper study. So Ms. Chadron, she delves just right in by mentioning the word polarization. Now, I think probably a lot of us are probably kind of familiar with that term and a little bit about what it means. Now, I remember often hearing the words polar opposites. And that word was to describe people and ideas that are probably maybe a little bit different than my own, or a little bit different. Now, Ms. Chadron, she expands a bit on polarization when she says, consciously or unconsciously, we carry around concepts of us versus them, right and wrong, worthy and unworthy. Again, some of those things that we may often view as opposites. And may even find it difficult to picture sharing the same space at the same time, right? So polarization is very prevalent when you get together groups of people, people who very much fit the definition of what we might call polar opposites. Now, Ms. Chadron states in the book, she states when groups of people or whole nations come together around these concepts, they can become hugely magnified, which may result in large-scale suffering, discrimination, oppression, and even war. But the thing is, though, is that many of these things we view as polar opposites are just that. They're just a view. Meaning that it's often what we'll find within the inner workings of our mind, right, of what's going on up here. Maybe a lot of these things we see that we don't like in other people, are often things that we can even despise most within ourselves. Maybe we feel unworthy on some scale, so we view others with this same flaw or also as unworthy. Now, whatever it is, we don't like it. It just feels gross inside, and it's just something we want to get rid of. We may even think to ourselves, oh, those people from other countries, nope, don't like them. Get them out of here, and I won't have to think about them anymore. Oh, you say they're fleeing the suffering they're in their own country. Well, I don't want to think about that. Get them out of here so I can move on with my own life, living in my own bubble. Get them out of here so I don't have to think about it, so I can be happy again. But is that really going to make us happy? Their suffering is still going to be happening whether we acknowledge it or not, right? We can avoid looking that homeless person in the eye, but is that suddenly going to put a roof over his or her head? Polarization happens when we look around and see things or people that are separate from ourselves, when we see them as the other. It's happening with different issues too. Think about the things right now that you are against. Then think about the other side. Whether it's another political side or something very similar, just something that differs in ideas other than your own. And I'm not saying it's wrong to have our feelings about things, but Ms. Chadron tells us, she says, whether it's for or against, there is a lack of openness and relaxation in our minds. If we observe ourselves closely, we'll probably discover that this is the case much of the time. Now, you might even be 100% correct in your stance. No one can deny, for instance, that something like bullying is wrong, right? They can try to deny it, but it doesn't make that denial right. Yet the for or against, as Ms. Chadron puts it, creates a lack of openness and relaxation in our minds. So it puts this wall up. And we just, as my mother used to say to me, begin to tune a deaf ear. We don't want to hear what they have to say, so we just don't. We instead take the view of them over there. And this can prevent us from nurturing what the Buddhists call bodhicitta, waking up for the benefit of all living beings. So it sounds as if we need to work a bit with our tendency to polarize, doesn't it? Ms. Chadron says we can begin by self-reflecting and noticing the for or against quality of our thoughts, words, and actions. Now, there are a couple of ways in which we can work with polarization. One is through physical action. Now, this one's pretty easy generally. We either do or we don't, right? We either take physical action or we don't. She uses the example of a spider in her book, which I kind of liked. So you find a spider in your bathtub as you're getting ready to take a shower. If you're like me, spiders kind of freak you out a little bit. But you find a spider in your bathtub, and you have one of two options when you find that spider, right? You can either turn the water on, wash the spider down the drain, and drown the spider, or you can remove it. And we may think to ourselves, it's really no big deal, what I do one way or the other. We make our decision about what we're going to do with the spider, and off we go. But it is a very big deal to the spider, though, isn't it? I'm sure that spider probably wants to live. Otherwise, it wouldn't try to run away from you when you put your hand up to it, right? And that's something we as living beings probably all have in common. It's 99% likely that most of us are going to look both ways before we cross the street, right? Of course, we're taught to do this, but also we've got this willingness and this desire to live. And crossing the street without looking both ways could affect that, couldn't it? Saving that spider might be a pretty big event for the spider, but it's also a major event for us as well. Because as the book states, it nurtures my awakening heart. Now, those of you who tuned in for my talk a few weeks ago may remember a question that I asked. I asked the question of, does it matter? This is an example as to where that question becomes very applicable in our daily lives. Maybe it's not the spider. Maybe it's making the decision to prevent ourselves from causing harm to another human. And not just physically, but with our words or our thoughts as well. When we take the time to approach each and every moment with this heightened awareness of our actions, we begin to lessen that gap between us, them versus us, bringing us a bit closer with each decision that we make, a bit closer together. Unfortunately, however, we sometimes let guilt interfere when we deal with polarizing actions. When I talk about guilt, maybe it's from a religious upbringing or something else. Maybe we end up feeling guilty and we tend to kind of bury ourselves in that feeling. But does it help us bridge that gap of separation? Does it really help us to heal us versus them? What about instead of feeling guilty, we view it as an educational moment, as an opportunity? Thinking to yourself, okay, so I said that. Well, that most certainly didn't go the way I had envisioned it in my mind. I caused a lot of hurt there with what I said. Maybe that wasn't the best course of action. In other words, we acknowledge that the behavior may not have been the best idea, but we learn from the moment and we move on. We move on with a different form of behavior the next time we're put in a similar situation, because likely that similar situation is going to roll back around again. It always does. But you see, polarization happens, as Ms. Chadron states, out of ignorance of our interconnectedness with each other and of our own basic goodness. But now, she says, instead of beating yourself up for losing it, you can aspire to be more aware of your own hurtful actions and more aware of how widespread these kinds of actions are in the world. Now, she mentions a practice that I really like. Now, this is one she calls just like me. She mentions going to a public place, having a seat, and just looking around. You find a person or mention something like, just like me, this person doesn't want to feel uncomfortable. And then you could add, or this person doesn't want to feel cold or hungry or unloved. Or even bring it around to more positive language. Just like me, this person wants to feel loved. Because when we do that, it puts more of a personal interconnectedness on it, doesn't it? We have religious, spiritual, and political differences, but maybe under the surface, we'll find that we're really not so different after all, right? Now, Ms. Chadron also talks about failure and mentions the fine art of failure. Now, failure, if you're like me, failure isn't a word that a lot of us like to think about, right? For me, I like the feel-good stuff. I'd love nothing more than my world to be full of rainbows, unicorns, and smiling faces. And I'm sure we'd all like that, wouldn't we? But Ms. Chadron mentions the Buddha and about how the Buddha spoke a lot about the importance of working with one's ego. Now, I'm sure at some point or the other, if you've been around Unity or New Thought teachings for any amount of time, you've heard the word ego brought up in Sunday talks or discussions. Ms. Chadron defines the ego as that which resists is. Now, the ego isn't a bad thing. The ego is just doing its job. It wants to protect us, and it does. It doesn't necessarily, though, differentiate between the various types of threats, though. It gets uncomfortable with vulnerability. Ego gets uncomfortable with uncertainty. It doesn't like it when we hear the word failure, because to the ego, avoiding failure at all costs is part of its job. But what is it we feel when we feel as if we failed at something? What emotion does thoughts of failure provoke or evoke? It makes us feel vulnerable, doesn't it? It breaks us open to where we experience these feelings of this raw vulnerability. Maybe a little bit of exposure too, right? Now, the ego tries to protect us from that because it really just flat out doesn't feel good. One of the ways ego attempts to escape this feeling is to blame failure on something outside of ourselves. She broke up with me. She's a terrible person. That sales guy over there sold me this car. It's his fault that I'm stuck on the side of the road. Or we deal with it by just flat out labeling ourselves as a failure. And that's not necessarily good either, because it does a couple of things. It places us into victim mode, and it also helps us to attract what we hold in mind. Like Unity, thoughts held in mind attract after the like kind, right? Something like that. That's not the exact words, but it's early here in Washington. That's my excuse anyway. But not saying that actually makes us a failure. But it may attract like situations into our lives. Miss Shadrone saves us, though, because she gives us a third option. She says there's a third way, however, which is to train ourselves simply to feel it. And she says, I like to call this holding the rawness of vulnerability in our heart. So yeah, you're going to have to do the work here. You're going to have to allow yourself to feel. When we do that, we stop resisting. Remember her definition of ego, that which resists what is. So what happens when we try that? There can be a physical sign, right? We might begin to feel tightness somewhere in the body, something that just feels off. Maybe you can't put your finger on it, but you just know it's something that feels off. But what if we were to give in for just a moment, to just allow ourselves to feel the discomfort? Now, Miss Shadrone mentions one of her teachers, a man by the name of Trungpa Rinpoche. And she mentions him in her book. And she talks about how he once said that we don't have the patience to stay within uncomfortable feelings for even 3 minutes. Now, Miss Shadrone said in response to that, she says, 3 minutes? That would be enough to win you some kind of a grand prize. Maybe make that grand prize $1 million, and you might see me sitting the uncomfortable for 3 minutes, right? Probably any of us. But it takes some work to sit within the uncomfortable. That's why we practice. And we give ourselves permission. This is probably most important. We give ourselves permission to go at our own pace. Maybe today we sat in the uncomfortable for 5 seconds. Maybe tomorrow it's 10. Maybe the next day it's 30. But we give ourselves permission to go at our own pace. But that can be another thing sometimes that the ego tries to interfere with. The ego is almost like a small child. It wants a solution and it wants it now. It wants what it wants and it wants it right now. It doesn't like to float around in this space of uncertainty. It wants, as she states in her book, resolution. It wants to control impermanence. It wants something secure and something certain to hold on to. So one of our dogs was in the backyard the other day, and I look out the window and I see him flailing his head all over the place. I'm like, yeah, what in the world is going on? I could tell something wasn't right, so I go out there, and I find that he's managed to get himself into some burrs. And one of the plants was full of burrs, and he stuck his head to it. And so burrs were just kind of stuck across his head. He wanted nothing more to get out of that. And as a result, he went into full panic mode. Yeah, somebody help me. I don't like this. But that's the way the ego reacts as well. It wants to shake it off, and it goes into panic mode until it does shake it off. But when we just stop trying to shake it off for a moment, when we just sit there within those feelings and allow them to be, despite however uncomfortable it's making us, despite however uncomfortable it's making us feel, despite the raw, pure emotion, we begin to, as Ms. Shadrone states in our book, gain a little insight into how things really are. We are then able to transfer that energy into something else. And she mentions creating poetry, writing, dancing, music, song. It can be anything for you. Closing down that vulnerability isn't as helpful or as useful as we like to think it is. Maybe only a moment, or maybe only for a moment or so. Maybe we think we feel better for a while, but it's always going to come back eventually, right? She mentions how it can also sometimes mask itself in other ways, through addictions, aggression, violence. But when we allow ourselves to just truly feel, we break open this space within our hearts. This space that allows the best part of us to come out and to be in our world. So I want to end with a quote by Pema Chodron. She says, "The time we live in is a fertile ground for training and being open-minded and open-hearted. If we can learn to hold this falling apartness without polarizing and without becoming fundamentalist, then whatever we do today will have a positive effect on the future. Namaste, my friends.
Thank you, Evan. I now invite you to begin to prepare yourself for reflective personal prayer and guided musical meditation, after which I ask that you remain in essential silence during the music. If you choose to, you may close your eyes. Feel the weight of your body as it relaxes into your chair and you let go of today's anxieties. Feel your feet on the solid earth beneath as you let go of tomorrow's worries. Become aware in this moment of your breathing. As you breathe in life and breathe out love. Breathe in life and breathe out love. And as you become centered, focus your attention on your beautiful heart, your beautiful Christ self. Become filled with gratitude and allow into yourself that which fills you with peace and light. So we begin. to gently return to this place.
Now we move from meditation to our affirmation of prosperity. And this is a time in our service when those of us who think of Unity of Appleton as our spiritual home practice putting spirit first in our financial life. We know that when we do this, not only does it prosper the spiritual community we love, it also supports our own spiritual growth and prosperity. Let this be a time to connect with the guidance of spirit in you and give whatever amount spirit guides you to give. Whatever that amount is this morning, take it in your hand and bless it with your love. And if you are one of the growing number of us who give electronically, take the gift into your heart. Feel free to bless the plate as it passes by and let yourself feel as grateful as you can to God in you as your own source. Then please join us in our affirmation of prosperity. And please say with me our affirmation of prosperity. Unity, did I do it okay? Yeah? Oh, wait, we'll say this then. Divine love in and through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I joyfully give and willingly receive. I give in love, and I trust God as my source. And our affirmation of prosperity. Unity of Appleton is alive with the energy of spirit in the flow of divine abundance and radiant with unlimited possibilities.
In this moment, in this place, I remember who I am, letting fear and worry fall away from me. I open my eyes and see there is only love. There is only love that sets us free. There is only love. When I lose myself, when it seems I've lost my way, when I go inside and quiet my mind, I hear Spirit gently say, there is only love. There is only love. Love that heals, love that sets us free. There is only love.
So we have some announcements. A thank you and a big shout out to the building and grounds crew of John Polakowski, Alan Cousineau, Tom Dusterheft, Bedford Hines, for caulking all our windows. This is the next day. Tom's like, oh man, I'm sore. I don't know what I did.
Yeah, really.
Anyway, we should be nice and warm this winter because we are not living in Washington where it's still 60 degrees. We have the Spiritual Social Action Team is looking for folks to rake and weed for Chain Reaction Day, Saturday, October 29th. And there's a sign-up sheet at the Connect and Serve table. And please bring gloves, rakes, and blowers if you have them. There's the coats for kids. Has a box here in the back of the sanctuary until October 27th. Take a moment to go through your closets and donate gently used coats or go out and buy a new one. They will take any size coat, even adult sizes. I'm like, my coats are like 40 years old. So, I don't know. Gently used. Yeah. I am like, is this gently used? I guess it's all in your perspective, as Mary Schneider would say. Save the date, honoring our past, creating our future from 10 until 3 on Saturday, November 5th. And we were looking at the impact of Unity's future and make a difference. And also there's food. I think we're going to have soup, homemade soups.
Yep.
And breakfast? Okay. Details in your inbox, or there are paper copies on the Connect and Serve table. There is one opening for a new board member. This is a perfect opportunity for you. That means you, to join the board. Imagine that's you as I say this. Lend your skills, experience, and wisdom to Unity of Appleton. And then the Spiritual Social Action Committee would love some more volunteers. Talk to either Louise or Bedford if you have any questions. Speaking of Spiritual Social Action Committee, they are honoring the birthdays of our congregation and celebrating our wonderful community by introducing monthly birthday cupcakes. Don't worry, we will celebrate all the birthdays we've missed before the end of the year, as we celebrate birthday monthly starting the first Sunday of the month after October. We will ask if anyone has a birthday that month, and then they can get their very own cupcake. They will be kept downstairs in the freezer, and anyone with an October birthday is welcome to take one today, and a candle also. That's very sweet. And there are also gluten-free and vegan options too.
Janice's
Happy
birthday
birthday,
today.
Janice. Today? We thank your mother and father for bringing you to us. Oh, yeah, that happened also. On Tuesday was Tom's birthday, and believe me, he had no shortage of cake. And it was good. He appreciated it. He was pretty happy. Any other birthdays in October? Okay. So we're going to end with our prayer for protection. If you'd like to stand and really expand your spirit out to the universe. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.
Your love is lifting us higher than I've ever been lifted before. Our love